Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You have reached the No Name Cinema Society, and this is our classic movie discussion, episode 60.3. Tonight we're going to dig deeper in one of our films from 1959, North by Northwest. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I am in a place you probably haven't seen me before. I'm in Newtown, Pennsylvania, of all places, visiting a friend in between some jobs, and I'll be here for the next couple episodes, it looks like. So I've got that and I've got a new panelist to introduce you to in a few minutes. But first, the old standby. He's an everyday below the liner thrust into an international game of espionage. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Evans is here.
Hello, good to see you.
He thinks it's good to be seen. He likes that you're seeing him. And our new member of the society, ladies and gentlemen, he may seem like a mild-mannered sound designer, but he's really the mastermind of the CIA. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Polis is here.
Hello, Jonathan. Hello, Alex.
Welcome to the society, Matt.
Nice to be here.
Is it the CIA or the National Intelligence Association?
Fair point. But speaking of Matt is our first society member ever to be in the Mountain Time Zone in Colorado. You're in Boulder, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Boulder, Colorado.
He might have some ties to the CIA because Alex doesn't know this, but Matthew Polis' cousin is the governor of the state of Colorado.
I cannot confirm nor deny that statement.
But strangely, Wikipedia can. So, in our modern world that it is. Matt, I mentioned I'm in Newtown, but you may appreciate where I am staying. It looks like I'm in a kid's room because I am in what used to be a kid's room, but now it's just a third floor room for an old friend of Matt and I, still a friend of mine. I'm at Abbey Leafs in Pennsylvania here, Maddie.
Very nice.
She said to say hello. I thought you would appreciate. Here's our schedule for this, our 60th series of episodes. It's kind of amazing. It started last Thursday and then continued with our indie spotlight, the film Manos Sucias from 2015. And of course, tonight is a classic movie discussion of North by Northwest. And this upcoming Monday, Matt will be back for our 44th Sound Off, in which we're going to do a character actor spotlight that we call What's Their Bucket? And we're going to do a tweet beat in which we answer questions about our finale episodes, the top 10, Oscar preview, and the 1959 review. And Patrick and I will be counting down our top 5 films from 1959, and that's coming up this Monday. And now, one of the traditions on the show, and I did not tell Matt about this, because he was never a big drinker to begin with. But Alex, are you drinking with me?
Yeah, I have a bit of a whiskey ginger here.
Whiskey ginger, and I've got Southern Tier New Juice IPA. That's I'm gonna bust open. Matt, do you have anything?
I have a microphone preamp right here.
Okay, this came out of the can faster than I expected. Making a mess too soon. All right, so every 10 episodes, we look back at the previous 10. It's sort of a tradition. This is our 60th episode. So here is a graphic of the last 10 classics. Out of those 10, the decade most represented is the 80s, with 3 films on there. There's 1 Best Picture winner in that bunch, 5 Best Picture nominees, and Alex, you did 2 shows on this list, Wild Bunch, and of course, tonight's episode. Anything on this list that stands out? Matt, obviously, you are new to the show. Is there an episode on there that you wish you would have seen? You can pretend, too. I mean, just humor me.
I wouldn't mind seeing the E.T. episode.
Okay, yeah.
That's the episode I'd be interested to. My 2 connections to that are I worked for the Stan Winston School for Character Arts for several years. Stan Winston and his studio made the E.T. puppet. Henry, who plays Elliot in the film, is one of the founders of my historical fencing club that I train with.
With the top 5 child performances of all time, I named Henry Thomas as number 1. On the last classic that we did in episode 59.3, which was Double Indemnity, I said the trivia for this episode, which was that tonight's film was going to be the film that I named as the best film of 1959. So those of you that watched our 1959 review knew what was coming. It's the 3rd Hitchcock film that we've reviewed on this show so far. We did Vertigo in episode 14.3 and Suspicion in episode 20.3. We also did a top 5 Hitchcock films in episode 20.4, in which North by Northwest I named number 1. And I also named North by Northwest number 1 in my top 5 action comedies in episode 36.4. So that is the trivia tidbit for this evening. Matt, have you seen previous episodes of this show to prepare for tonight, or are you just winging it?
I've seen a couple.
Good. So do you know what's coming up next then?
Yes. Why don't you just remind us?
It's time for the summary. We always kick off a review by summarizing the film a little bit for the audience. You guys ready for that?
Yes.
I'm ready and excited.
Ready and excited. North by Northwest. Roger Thornhill's a fast-moving, well-to-do advertising executive in New York City who gets mistaken for an American spy by the name of George Kaplan. The bad guys try to kill him and then frame him, making Thornhill suddenly a fugitive from justice. The only way to get his life back is to play the role of Kaplan so he can find out the truth and untangle this dangerous mess that he fell into. First thing is, I'm going to give some screening notes. I've screened this film 4 times, actually, since I've started doing screenings in 2011, one of which was in Matt Polis' studio back when he lived in New York on July 18th, 2012. And then the next one was August 28th, 2016 in Los Angeles. We screened it in Bryant Park. I didn't screen it, but we went to see it at Bryant Park August 4th, 2017. And just this past February 3rd, Patrick came over and watched it at my house for our 1959 review. That was February 3rd, 2020. So over the course of the 4 screenings, and Matt in a second will tell you what his memory of that screening was. The New York screening, as I recall it, was a mixed reaction. People were generally entertained, but poked a lot of holes through it. The LA screening thought it was an amazing, tight masterpiece. The Bryant Park group thought it was outstanding and exciting. Patrick, when he came over, and he said this in the 1959 review, said that he was impressed, entertained by the technical qualities, but didn't think it was all that special. We're going to move to these guys, see what they think in their opening thought segments. Alex, I'm going to let you go first since you are an expert at opening thoughts. 1 sentence on how you felt about the film in general.
I thought it was a technical and screenwriting achievement that was very impressive, and Cary Grant found great moments of humor through it that kept it humanized and kept me as an audience member connected.
Long sentence, but 1 sentence nonetheless. Matty P., what is your opening thought?
I thought it was great. It was a very refreshing type of movie to watch. I haven't watched a lot of movies that are older than, say, 20 years. I don't know, just 10. Not a classic movie lately. So watching something like this that was simpler and more deliberate in all of its simplicity was so refreshing. And it's not a lot of stuff happening simultaneously. We can get more into it, but I liked it.
Now, what is your memory of that screening 8 years ago in your studio in New York City?
I do. It's hard to remember exactly, but I do remember what you're saying. There was kind of a split. I think maybe some of the people couldn't get out of the current expectation for what a movie delivers or how it delivers it, including dialogue, and they got caught up in not getting those things and couldn't adjust to where this film came from and have a different perspective from which to watch it. But I think that was probably the minority. I think most people still appreciated it. That's where the split came down. Time shifting your own perspective. It's
interesting too watching with Patrick because he also had a set of expectations based on the fact that it was a Hitchcock film in general. And so when it had as much humor as it had in it, that really confused him. He struggled to get a foothold with the tone. I've obviously already tipped my hand in terms of my opening thoughts about how much I like this film. I've already named it #1 film of 1959 in the 1959 review, #1 Hitchcock film of all time, and that top 5 in episode 20.4. It is and I think I said in the 1959 review, it's my 19th favorite film of all time. So I'm a big fan. And for me, guys, and Alex alluded to this, breaking it down, the chief thing I think is the screenplay. And I know everyone talks about Alfred Hitchcock's skill as a director, and I think that's at work here too, and we'll get to that. But in this particular case, I named it as the best original screenplay of 1959. It's ranked 21st best all time from the Writers Guild of America, behind, incidentally, Some Like It Hot, which was also from 1959, albeit an adapted screenplay. The plot is complicated, but I think it's still clear, labyrinthine without being obtuse. It's entertaining and with constant momentum, rarely slowing down. Particularly impressive and bold, I thought, was the total shift of perspective midway through the film that it's sort of famous for, where it shifted from the limited perspective, i.e. Thornhill's perspective, to a general perspective in which it all of a sudden gave us all the answers to the mystery. So now we know more than Thornhill does, which adds a layer of suspense and intrigue. It's kind of a bold choice, but I think it works beautifully. So guys, where are you on the screenplay and the plot of the film?
It's such a great predecessor and really paved the way for a lot of the humor we see in modern action comedies and a lot of the Marvel films that are out now. Watching it again now after having seen that whole franchise explode in the last 10 years as it has, made me appreciate this film in a whole new way.
James Bond would not have come into being, at least as a film franchise, without North by Northwest. The success of this film led to those films being greenlit, and also Raiders of the Lost Ark owes a lot to North by Northwest.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have made the Marvel connection, but I see it now where, like, the opening when he's walking towards with his secretary, I guess, and he's basically winking to the camera all the time, like that is a joke. And I think that's what the Marvel movies did originally, less successfully. Now they're better at integrating it into natural dialogue, and it's kind of funnier. You don't feel as bad laughing at it, and they're pretty good now. The sort of winking to the camera humor, see that connection if that's what you're talking about.
And it's a defense mechanism for him, I think, to some degree.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well.
I thought it built the character well.
This movie's ending always strikes me. I always forget, it's like 1 second past the climax, like probably literally 3 seconds is the credits. And is that something that stands out to you or not? For me, it's like bam. And is that a different structure, or is that just like a thing that got shortened?
Well, I mean, the thing
I liked it.
Yeah, no, the thing that's famous about the ending is Hitchcock being a bad boy. You know, the train going through the tunnel is supposed to be phallic and sexual imagery.
That didn't even stand out to me.
It did to Hitchcock. That's the famous thing about the ending. But I would say that in looking at the films from 1959, and a couple years ago we looked at the films from 1942, one thing that they had in common is they just ended. Like when the movie was over, they were done. And that's that trait is actually common for films of the 40s and 50s, I would say. Maybe even the 30s as well.
Yeah.
So is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, just sort of like the first 30 minutes was a certain thing, and then there was like the rest of the middle. And then if you want to consider that climax or that she's about to fall, like the climax, then it was almost like this like minuscule and pretty thin beginning, but also long for what it was, and like an enormous middle.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, I would say that screenwriters of the early Hollywood and into the early 60s, you know, would argue that falling action is overrated. Falling action being, for the audience's sake, you know, sort of the third act, sort of denouement kind of thing. And so yeah, a lot of films of the period, and you already alluded, you don't watch too many anymore. They just end, like when the movie, like, and to Alice's point, it's very efficient because honestly, what else do we need to see? Like if you're really looking at it from a dramaturgical point of view, like they escape and we know they're getting married. Boom.
It almost felt like a studio note to even add the scene on the train that they're getting married rather than just having it end on top of Mount Rushmore.
I think we needed to know that they
I think the film needed it. It's the type of thing for knowing the different edits and reshoots, like when a movie's getting made. I would think Hitchcock is calculating enough that he had that in mind from the start, and that was probably in the screenplay.
Especially with the way they transitioned from Mount Rushmore to the upper bunk of the bed. He
gets the girl, he gets to live, and he gets his life back.
And that's all you need. So I think it's perfect as far as any is concerned. And it sounded like you liked it, but you realized it was unique. Is that what you're getting at, Matt?
Yeah, I did like it. I do like how efficient it is. I don't need like the waiter to come in and like deliver the wrong dish or whatever after my... I totally agree with you. I didn't know it was a thing at the time. What about that first 30? Is that an act to you? Where the POV switches dramatically, where you noted before?
That is unique to Hitchcock. He did it in Vertigo as well, where all of a sudden he gives you all the information of the mystery. And that is unique to Hitchcock because he would define it as the difference between suspense and surprise. If you've got the limited perspective of the protagonist, you're surprised whenever he is. But if you know what everything is...
There was a few moments where I wondered, is he actually Capulin?
I mean, I've seen it a bunch of times, so I know, but I think that's cool that you thought that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure that was partially intentional for first-time audiences.
One of the things that surprised Patrick a couple months ago is how damn funny the movie is. Thornhill has a very flip way of carrying himself, which provides a great deal of humor. His relationship with his mother is highly enjoyable, while also effective from a character point of view. Some of the sexual innuendo in the dialogue is extremely sexy and well executed for the time. So guys, still on the screenplay here, how do you feel about the dialogue of the film?
That's great. I mean, that's great. I think, like I was saying, that sometimes it feels like it's trying to be clever, and it seems like that's coming through. Other times it actually is clever, and it's it's more in context. And I liked it better when it was more in context. The first shot where he's walking towards the camera, talking to his secretary, that's much more just wanting us to know it's funny. And then later when he's in the, he's kidnapped and they're trying to get information out of him for the first time. To me, that feels more in context, and I enjoyed it more. It felt more in the moment. it was the same type of writing, but I thought it was better executed.
Better placement for it, I think, almost.
Yeah, I think the difference is when there's other people in the room that could be his audience potentially for what he's saying, as opposed to just us at home. That's the difference. If there's no one else potentially in the context of the film or the scene that could be listening to him, then it feels a little more forced than if there was actually someone there who could appreciate what he's saying in the moment.
You use the word audience, and I want to come back to that later. Hold on to that. Alex, dialogue.
I felt like his degree of like confidence and assertion continues to grow like scene to scene through the film. He's discombobulated thinking, oh, this is just a mistake at the beginning. And then he gets very scared. And as he comes to finding a way to assert his own agency, I felt like the dialogue captured where the character was at the different points in the story well.
Cool. Now, I have some favorite lines. Do you guys have some favorite lines that you remember from the film that stick out? No? More crickets. Well, some of mine was in the elevator when the mom is like, "Are you trying to murder my son?"
Oh, I really like that. Yeah, the elevator scene there was very great.
To me, it was great. Another one I liked was when he's at the train station and he's got the sunglasses on, and the ticket taker's like, "Something wrong with your eyes with the sunglasses?" And he's like, "Yeah, they're sensitive to questions." That's brilliant, I think, especially in 1959. And then sort of quasi-risque line when he's in the auction. Van Damme finds that Eva Marie Saint they were in a room, and he was like, "He was in your room?" And Thornhill's like, "Sure, isn't everybody?" I mean, and it goes so quick. And Ernest Lehman is famous for his dialogue. If you haven't seen The Sweet Smell of Success, written by Ernest Lehman, that is a masterclass in dialogue, even better than this. It's not as good of a directed film as this, but it's a great film. That's also
I think I talked about on the show with you about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which he's also one of the writers on.
He adapted
yeah. Just that and Sabrina and Sound of Music, just the range of very, very different characters and stories that he explores.
If somebody asked me to name the greatest screenwriter of all time, I would put Ernest Lehman probably number one ahead of William Goldman. You talked about the range, but also they're all really strong. Great dialogue, good storytelling.
He's somebody that feels like he can capture any genre.
Yeah. His goal with this film was to make the Hitchcockiest of Hitchcock films. And I think in that sense, he succeeded. That's his quote, not mine. Speaking of Hitchcock, that does segue us to direction. I do think that there's something unique about this film and the Hitchcock oeuvre, and that is the tone, the supreme mix of humor, suspense, romance, and action. It has everything that you might want. So much humor and romance, in fact, that, like I said earlier, it confused Patrick when he watched it. He was expecting a white-knuckle Hitchcock kind of film. It seemed to throw him based on his very incorrect or at least limited set of expectations. I think it's perfectly balanced to make for taut entertainment, a testament not only to Hitch, but also George Tomasini's editing, which I think is very strong on as well. And I don't know that we'd see anything like it until Raiders of the Lost Ark, in the sense of something that hit all of those beats at every turn that successfully. So guys, tone and Hitchcock's handling of tone.
Earlier, when you introduced the film, you said it was an action comedy, which kind of threw me, because even though it's totally accurate, I don't think I would have ever described it that way. And it's interesting to think of it because it certainly was a lot funnier than I remembered it being, or that I assumed it would have been. And but if it's just what would be for you the difference between an action comedy and, say, like a Hitchcock thriller that happens to be funny?
I would say the amount, you know what I mean? It's a witch's brew of elements. I think the amount of humor makes this an action comedy. And I think I alluded to this a little bit when I did that top 5 action comedies, a couple years ago, back in episode 36.4. Another one on that list was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I also called an action comedy. I think that this film and that film set the sort of template for what we consider to be the modern action comedy. Things like Lethal Weapon and Midnight Run, that blend of action and humor. And I think it needs to be enough of a blend. You know what I mean? I'm trying to think of a Hitchcock film that has just a few moments of laughter, maybe Foreign Correspondent, or even 39 Steps, or Man Who Knew Too Much, which is mostly serious but has a few moments of levity. I wouldn't necessarily call those action comedies, but this one has so much, 40, what is it, 40? I don't know when to make it a math equation, but it's a gut feeling. But I mean, this has enough humor, I would say.
And I was going to say, my familiarity with Hitchcock is actually more for his TV anthologies, more so than his films.
I watched a lot during our 1959 in review because it was
yeah,
on.
and Hitchcock's reputation and how people think of him in the modern zeitgeist is that he is horror and thriller and all of these things, or they think of him as very authoritarian in how he made his films. But there's always a lot of humor throughout his career, I feel like. When you go back and watch it, you really appreciate all these little funny moments that he's able to create.
Very often they're little funny moments. Like I think of, I mean, the year before this, he did Vertigo, which is considered the greatest film of all time now. There's not that much humor in Vertigo. Like, it is pretty heavy and deep. And before that, he did The Wrong Man, which is a pretty straightforward narrative of a true story. There's small bits of humor, but I would say this film is probably the funniest Hitchcock movie. Like, not Marnie, The Birds has some funny moments in the beginning, but outside of that, nothing really this funny.
Yeah, and again, the humor I'm referring to is a lot more in the Alfred Hitchcock Presents hour-long TV specials.
Oh, for sure.
Which there's a bunch in those, and I think that makes more sense for a TV audience that's at home, more likely with a family, rather than just adults in the theater.
Well, I have 2 points. One, that kind of humor is very much like almost tongue-in-cheek, kind of droll, macabre, truly Hitchcockian humor. Whereas this film, I feel like, has a lot more quips, a lot more, which is Ernest Lehman's, I think.
I thought it blended British and American humor styles really well.
Yeah. The other thing that Hitchcock does possibly better than anybody is shot selection. And there's some very memorable shots in the film. The overhead coming out of the UN comes to mind, dangling off Mount Rushmore, of course. And probably the most famous sequence of the movie, an influential sequence, is Cary Grant in the foreground with the killer crop duster getting dangerously closer in the background. However, he uses those power shots sparingly, making them all the more special when they come up. Otherwise, he plays many expositional scenes theatrically wide. Or if it's a heavy dialogue scene, he does basic shot reverse shots, which seems appropriate. He's the kind of director that always knows what to show you and when, how to manipulate you without you feeling manipulated. Shot selection, as far as Hitchcock is concerned.
I felt like he really had a very strong sense of mise-en-scène throughout the whole thing. You know, when you needed those big, dramatic, thrillery moments, he went to that. But when that's not what the scene was, or he didn't want you to enter the scene feeling that way, he would stick to that wide shot of just letting them play it out, especially if it was something with a little more physical comedy. And if it was like a intense character-driven conversation, the shot reverse shot, like you said, it kept you from being distracted and let you focus on the story and focus on the dialogue and the performances.
For sure. Matty P.
You mentioned my favorite shot for sure was the overhead after the knifing of the UN. That was incredible. I didn't expect it, even though I've seen it before, I guess. It kind of stuck out. And you're right, it's kind of used sparingly, those kind of highlight shots. And I think in a way that makes them stand out, like you said, in another way, they almost don't belong. Not only was it at an awkward angle, surprising angle, like fully above, but there's a color palette, there's a geometry, and there's all these like really interesting things for 10 or so seconds of the shot that it was kind of came out of nowhere. And I didn't dislike it, and I didn't think it shouldn't be in the movie, but it was almost so unique, even in the context of its own movie, let alone his other works or whatever. Just comparing to what it's next to, it did stand out quite a bit. I'm not saying I dislike it. I just noticed how different it was. I also loved the opening credits, which is a similar kind of like striking angle. That and this other shot reminded me a lot of David Fincher, especially the Panic Room opening. Do you happen to know that movie and that opening?
That was a direct reference to North by Northwest.
You also mentioned James Bond, that I felt like the opening credits of this with like the cool animation to the title sequences and everything, that's something that was happening more and more in the 50s, especially the late 50s, but that really kind of did set the stage for opening those action comedy James Bond thrillers. They always have a cool opening sequence. It's almost the thing that ties the whole franchise together more than anything else.
Yeah, for sure. So the next thing, guys, and Alex will appreciate this as a below the liner, I do want to talk about some of the craft elements of the film. As I joked in the 1959 in review, Patrick likes to chat and ask questions during movies, and that was particularly true of North by Northwest. And he was constantly impressed by the various elements of the film, how they do that, how they do this, like constantly over the course of the film. And if he got anything from the film, it's that it was a technical achievement for its time, even without the scope or scale of something like Ben-Hur. One of the things he wanted to ask a lot about was rear projection, and he couldn't believe how good the rear projection scenes looked, especially in the scenes that the actors that were moving. One that he was thinking about is in the Chicago train station when Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint are essentially walking on something akin to a treadmill to make sure that the lighting on them stays even and matches the background that isn't actually even there, because they're in a studio on a treadmill.
And allowed for the great sound, like the on-set sound that they were able to capture at the dialogue too.
Yeah, so he was really impressed by that. Did that stand out to you guys at all?
It did. I just watched for the first time the 1944 film Gaslight the other day, which had a bunch of rear projection in it. The difference in like 15 years, how much better the technology and the technique got on this. And also, Hitchcock is a guy who's known for planning out every shot, spending a lot of time in pre-production. JB will be able to attest to this as well. That there's so often, especially in the indie film world, it's so much like, oh, we'll figure it out on the day, which means like we'll figure it out while we're on set and need to get it done. That is not the time to do special effects. It seemed like Hitchcock really utilized these resources well, and I can only imagine his assistant director did an amazing job scheduling all of that pre-production, making that happen so that all those department heads got what they needed and made this beautiful visual symphony that we got to watch.
Matt, the rear projection.
I think I remember the train being better than, for example, the car drivings. I guess for the time they were good. Looked very clearly rear projection. Wasn't necessarily impressed with it, but not trying to be impressed by it. It's different technology.
To be fair, Patrick was in this project with me where we were watching dozens of 1959 movies. So I think his perspective was looking at it strictly from a 1959. Another thing that he was really impressed with, and maybe you guys will be too, is the way they use models and matte paintings. And I've already talked about the UN and Mount Rushmore scenes, which beautifully meshed live action models and exquisitely detailed matte paintings. And the best thing about the craft elements is, as impressive as they are, they all serve the story and don't really feel forced or showy to me. Guys, how do you feel about models, matte paintings, etc.?
In general, I love the use of those techniques, practical effects, more so than, say, the rear projection. I like the practical element of those.
I was very impressed with the Mount Rushmore sets and miniatures and how those things were all pretty seamlessly integrated together, and creating the interactive element of how they were climbing down the sides by the faces with like those slats that are actually at the real Mount Rushmore. It was supporting their weight and everything. Like that takes a lot for a production designer and their team to build all of that. Really created the suspense and sense of danger. And
fun little tidbit, since you're speaking about the original title of the film was The Man in Lincoln's Nose.
I think North by Northwest was a smarter choice. Right,
but I think it's a fun little full story. It's hard to talk about a Hitchcock movie without talking about Bernard Herrmann's score. And I don't know if Matt is a composer. Both of you guys are composers, actually, or have composed in the past anyway. And Matt is a sound designer by trade. So I wanted to see how you guys felt about A, the Bernard Herrmann score, and B, the overall sound design of the film. Matty P, anything?
It's the kind of score where it's, a lot of times the score in film school is supposed to kind of be effective without really calling attention to itself, where scores like this are not really following that rule, and it's okay. They're upfront, and they're bold, and they're doing something, and you notice them, and and it's good. So I thought it was very effective.
I would say this film intended to be a spectacle, and the score didn't hold back, drawing you in. And when there was big tension and action or something looming, or even the funny moments, that it complemented that well and really created all of those moods.
The iconic music from the movie starts out the movie, and so as soon as the music starts, I feel like you're in.
It really felt like a kind of like an overture, like you get at the beginning of a play. And you referenced Ben-Hur, that I think when we watched that at your place recently, there is a whole overture that plays for like 15 minutes or whatever before the movie even starts on the DVD or VHS or whatever you're watching, or digital stream. In
addition to that iconic music, there's little cues throughout the movie that are actually quite smaller and detailed. There's one called Conversation Piece, that's what it's called on the album, relating to his relationship with Eve Kendall. It's lovely and sweet without losing the tension. I don't know if you guys noticed.
Yeah, it underscored the moments between them on the train really nicely.
Yeah. Matt, anything else about that? Or what about the overall sound design?
Sound design is interesting for older films just because, like all the different crafts, things have changed and technology's changed and abilities have changed. To me, a film like this sounds super clean and super sparse. That doesn't detract, because in a film like this, where everything is super intentional and crafted, it works in its favor to be clean and sparse, as opposed to it feeling like they didn't bother to add things. It's more like there isn't anything on the screen visually or coming out of the speakers unless it's supposed to be. There's not a lot of fluff or extra stuff that could be there but doesn't have to be there. Its sparseness wasn't taking away the experience for me, at least in this time around.
Well, let's segue to performances. And the film is not often discussed in terms of performances, but with that said, I'd say that they're all really strong. I've been critical of Cary Grant historically, but I think this is the perfect role for him. He makes the wit and the charm work for the story, and he does it so effortlessly and manages a character arc that is effective and interesting. In many cases, the aforementioned script relies on him to navigate some of the more outrageous plot aspects, and he does it with aplomb. So guys, Cary Grant...
I agree. There's a stylization to the whole film, and it spreads to the acting as well. They can get away with being a little bit intentional or funny in a way that suits this movie where it might seem cheesy otherwise. It's all crafted. It's kind of like a Wes Anderson film where like you can get away with things where you couldn't otherwise because it's not supposed to be a certain thing. It's supposed to be its own thing. And so the way everyone's acting is very much in line with how the movie's laid out and how the scenes are laid out and how intentional everything is. And so if they're being a little bit controlling in the way they're delivering their lines or what they're saying or what they're able to get away with saying, it works. You get a little latitude for being less, say authentic or organic, but for the sake of fitting into the context of what's being created, everyone works well on that level.
I agree with that. Alex, how did you feel about Cary Grant here?
I really liked it. The main performance I always think of him in is Bringing Up Baby, and I think that movie is really funny and great, but this film really created a realistic scenario and character for his style of acting, his characterization to really shine through and feel believable within the world of the story.
I think that's true. It's almost as if it was written for the persona of Cary Grant.
In some ways, he's a cartoon of himself. He'd been far enough into his career that he would have that self-awareness.
And normally when we compare a performance to a cartoon, it would be a bad thing, but I don't think you're saying
No,
it
I
is.
mean that as a compliment.
It's perfect for this movie, and I think that's what Matt was sort of saying as well. But then on the flip side, there's Eva Marie Saint, who is possibly the best actress Hitchcock ever had to work with, as a lead anyway. She showed a glamorous, flirty fun side that she didn't get to flex in her more serious roles before this. It's ultimately a one-dimensional character that she infuses with life and helps elevate the film even more. I think without her, with a lesser actress, those scenes really would have hurt the film. She helps make them fly, and I think she brought more to the table than Hitchcock even expected. Guys, Eva Marie Saint.
I was really impressed with her work in the film, and I thought that she did a good job of playing the scenes of, this is the type of woman that you think I am, and I'm going to let you have that assumption, but I'm being more present, more intelligent in the scene, and just letting Cary Grant or the other men make fools of themselves. Even when she's being quiet, doesn't have a lot of dialogue, I thought she exhibited a lot of agency with the character.
Maddie.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything, and for the same reasons, I would say she's not really a one-dimensional character. I think she's quite dynamic. Maybe you mean in terms of what she...
I mean, on the page, it's one-dimensional, that she brought life to the character.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, she does a lot with the role then.
And that brings us to James Mason, who I think is one of the great all-time villains in my book. I mean, he didn't make AFI's list of top 50 villains of all time, but I think his Van Damme is terrific, deliciously droll, and captivating, even without any real backstory or information. Mason seems to have filled in those blanks for himself and offered us a complete character and a perfect foil for Cary Grant's Roger Thornhill. Guys, James Mason.
He was just this fun, over-the-top villain who is like, yeah, I don't believe in anything. My goal is to overthrow everything you're into because I think it sucks. I always appreciate a character like that.
Yeah, he's a great villain because even in his first scene, you got the sense that he was very powerful and could probably accomplish anything without getting in trouble, without having any reason to believe that. It just the way he carried himself and his mannerisms, it was very effective from the first moment.
That's a really good point, better than I put it. Eva Marie Saint is one of the cast members who won an Oscar, but the other one is the assistant, Martin Landau, who won much later for Ed Wood. He's one of the most unique henchmen in movie history, I think, as Leonard. The script and his performance famously plays around with homoeroticism without losing any of the character's menacing nature or his dignity. Quite layered as far as villains' assistants go, and I think Landau executes it perfectly. Guys, do you remember Martin Landau as Leonard?
Yeah. I mean, he just has such a great character actor look to be one of the bad guys just because he has very large facial features. He's able to play creepy really well, and you can see that he knows it and like leads into it, both like funny and menacing ways.
But then in one of our movies from 1988, he's super sweet in Tucker the Man in His Dream, so he clearly has a lot of range, or would develop a lot of range anyway.
Not one of the 45 1988 films that I watched, but I'll have to check it out.
Fair enough. Martin Landau.
I agree. Super well cast, just natural creep factor, and worked well.
Natural creep factor, check. Matt, where am I on the natural creep scale? Or do I have a number?
Quite high.
Okay, moving on. So, guys, guess what's next? We've got through the basic part of the discussion. Now we've got the big one. Alex, do you remember what's coming up?
Themes?
Themes. It's the T word. and I'm trying to keep it down here because there are kids in the house. It is the T word, where we talk about themes of the film. It's funny because Ernest Lehman used to openly mock people when they searched for deeper themes of North by Northwest, but I do feel like there are there. And this first one is hard to describe. They're both kind of hard to describe, but I'm going to take a shot at it. Matt Polis talked about audience earlier, and Roger Thornhill's audience, not necessarily us as an audience. And I thought that was interesting. So that sort of plays into this concept I have of the true self. One of the things I talked about in the 1959 review is how everyone in the movie is play acting. Not just the actors. I'm talking about the characters themselves are constantly taking on roles. Roger Thornhill becomes George Kaplan when it suits him. Van Damme doesn't correct Thornhill when Thornhill assumes that his name is Townsend. Eve has 3 different roles to play that she takes on over the course of the film. Leonard pretends not to be in love with Van Damme for various points of the film. No one is who they seem or who they say they are, which is part of the intrigue, I think. But in the case of our 2 leads and playing these other roles, they find aspects of themselves that they didn't know they had, and each grows as a person as a result. I made the comparison on the 1959 in review of North by Northwest to a recent film that I liked a lot, a number 2 film of 2017, Jumanji. It may seem far-fetched, but hear me out. In both films, our protagonists are put into an extreme situation in which they have to assume different identities, or avatars, if you will. And as a result, the protagonists find their true selves. In a way, both films are an argument for forcing yourself out of your comfort zone to truly discover what you have to offer. And I think also both films sort of represent the performances that we have to put on in everyday life, the roles that we have to play in order to socially interact with people depending on our situation. Like, you put me in a room of strangers, I'm going to act differently than I would, with the Alex and Maddie P, for example. It's sort of highlighting what is fact and what is fiction, even in our daily lives. What is the role playing? What is our true self, in other words? So that is one of the things this movie makes me think about. You guys have some funny looks in your faces. So what is your reaction to this first theme that I got?
I have 2.
2 reactions. Go.
I like what you're saying. The first thing that came to mind as you're going through the roles and the sort of the false pretenses, it very much goes back to the marketing career of the protagonist. And the second thing is the way you said all the other personas people are taking on in the movie allow them to see aspects of themselves they might not have otherwise. And that made me think of going to the movies in general. You go and see other people and do other things on the screen that are not you, but a well-written movie will make you sort of fit in there and find your own truth and get something out of a movie that was written for a million people. It'll feel like it was written for you.
Hitchcock does a lot that his Rear Window in and of itself is very much about audienceship. L.B. Jeffries in that movie, played by Jimmy Stewart, is basically watching several movies as we're watching him in a movie. That concept is constantly a theme in Hitchcock's work. Alex, what do you have to say about what my far-fetched theme here?
I agree with you that I definitely think it's a through line throughout. And it's also even just the premise of why the George Kaplan scenario exists is because the intelligence agency wants to rattle James Mason's character and make him believe that he's being tailed. The result of what happens to Cary Grant is just the warranted paranoia of James Mason's character because of the manipulation of federal law enforcement and intelligence gathering.
And that honestly is a great segue to my other theme, which is one that's talked about a lot as far as North by Northwest is concerned, and it gets a little deep, basically about moral relativism as relates to the Cold War at the time. If you look at North by Northwest from a distance, without any emotional investment, you could argue that some of the behavior of the protagonists, and especially the U.S. government officials that Alex was sort of getting at, is kind of shady and somewhat reprehensible. Supposed extreme circumstances may make it seem okay when the U.S. government plays with people's lives the way that they do, all under the auspices of winning the Cold War. So named because it's all about suspicion and fear without any real credible threat. So the movie takes into question what is right and what is wrong under such circumstances. I mean, we know Van Damme's people have killed, and so he's therefore the bad guy. But in some ways, he's on the run, similar to Thornhill. We actually don't know what's on the MacGuffin microfilm. And from a certain point of view, he may be as morally justified as we assume the professor and Eve are. And the consequences of his escape are vague at best, intentionally so. The point is that the assumed morality of our heroes is undercut a little bit, even for themselves at the second act plot point. There's this perception that the U.S. at the time equals good and Russia equals bad, and therefore anything the U.S. did to counter Russia was acceptable. But in this film, Roger seems to discover that's not necessarily the case, which quite frankly was a kind of a fresh idea in 1959, as we saw a lot of films that seemed to propagandize anti-communist sentiment. Which is not to say this film is ever pro-communist. It just doesn't let the Americans off the hook so easy. And I think, Alex, you were sort of getting at that to some degree, because at one point, one of these, we'll call them CIA for now, I forget the official agency.
It's like National Intelligence Agencies, they call them.
They're realizing this sticky wicket that Roger Thornhill is in, that they didn't, unintended consequence.
They leave him in danger.
I mean, with a shrug of the shoulders, and they say, "C'est la guerre." Like, that is their reaction. And so that is what I'm sort of getting at. That sort of summarizes the moral relativism that I'm talking about. It's not cool, but in the case of war, does it become good?
We were talking about audience before, and in some ways the intelligence community in this film are an audience to just watching what's happening with these people. We don't even know necessarily what was James Mason's character doing anything bad before they started meddling in his life. Was this entrapment? Does he potentially have better values than everybody else? At the same time, they don't really ever have him demonstrate, pontificate, or go into or whatever, any sort of socialist or Soviet or Marxist values. He's the bad guy, he wants money and power. And that's a lot of like the 50s propagandizing of what the eastern half of the planet's perspective was at the time.
I think my point is they purposely kept that open. They purposely kept him without a concrete code so that we could spin it on its ear and look at it from, what if he was, he had something worthwhile to say, or, you know what I mean? Like, I think they took the politics out of it intentionally to sort of look at this moral relativity issue.
He and the NIA people they're all this kind of manipulative people that is really Roger Thornhill's the one caught between all of it. None of these people see regular people as worthwhile or counting, and it's almost because he works in advertising like he deserves it.
But Roger Thornhill is not blameless either. Yes, he's a victim of circumstances to some degree, but he is certainly willing to manipulate Eve before he realized that she was manipulating him.
There's a reason he's divorced twice.
Matt Polis, it's a complex issue, moral relativism.
I definitely would take your cinema studies class, Jonathan. That's for sure.
Can you get me one? Because I really need a new job.
Again, like we were saying, the best art generally will leave it open to present you with something that seems straightforward, and there's like a black and white possible veneer. But then you can look deeper, or not even that deep sometimes, and see that the other side isn't necessarily the other side. It's just slightly askew from the first thing you thought of. You're tapping into a nice aspect of the film that probably isn't readily available to most people.
There are movies out there where the bad guy is very specifically amoral. And obviously Van Damme is a killer, but so is the American government in some of the scenes. They have blood on their hands. Now it's time for one of my favorite segments. Matt may remember this from his screenings, and Alex, you know what's coming, right?
Bracket?
Yes! It's the classic movie Showdown! A quieter version.
I'm really excited for all of the audio listeners to this episode to just experience quiet, restrained JB. It's such a contrast to his normal hosting.
It's true. This is a segment where we have movies go against each other in NCAA-style brackets. So it should be interesting. And without an NCAA tournament this year, this is the only fun that you're going to get. And we always start off with the rules so you can understand a little better. And Alex is in charge of reading the rules in this particular episode. So Alex, take it away.
Number one rule is seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. Polls need to be from JB hosted screenings at least 15 years or older, so from 2005 and back. I need to have been a high schooler or younger. Voters are eligible if they see both films within a 12-month period. Voters must see both films in JB's presence. JB is ineligible to vote, but he can break ties, much like the vice president in the Senate.
It's pretty good for Alex's first time reading the rules. Thank you, Alex. And Matt, you know the brackets because we used to do screenings at your studio in New York.
Yeah, I am familiar with that. I don't quite understand the 15-year rule, but I don't think I need to. But you can tell me if you wanted to explain it more.
I mean, just that we're considering a classic movie 15 years old or older. So,
the classic movie. I thought it said something about the screening had to occur. A JB screening had to occur prior to that, which didn't make a lot of sense.
Cut to the chase. Well, first thing I have to say is North by Northwest is actually on 9 different brackets that we have. And we're not going to do all 9 tonight. But I do want to catch you guys up on some of the ones that have happened before the votes that are going to happen tonight. In the bracket of Best Film not nominated for Best Picture, North by Northwest is a 2 seed, and this is the bracket that you voted on back in 2012, Matt. North by Northwest is a 2 seed, and up against 15 seed, The Great Escape, and that vote happened in 2012, and the winner would be North by Northwest. Won that one. It was the favorite there, so it moved on easily to the second round in that bracket. It's also on the Sight and Sound bracket, which is the bracket of the 64 top-rated films in the Sight and Sound poll, which comes out every 10 years. So this 2012 version is the one we used. And in that bracket, North by Northwest is a number 14 seed going up against number 3 seed, Jean Vigo's La Atalante. Do you remember watching La Atalante in your studio, Matt?
Yeah, I do. Not a lot of details, but yes.
Okay, that vote happened as well at Matt's studio, and the winner was also North by Northwest. The audience appreciated the French film from the early 30s, but it was a little too distancing for them. They couldn't get into it as much as they could, the fun of North by Northwest. The brackets for tonight, we have 2. And this first one's a little complicated. It's a 2-rounder. So looking at the AFI bracket now, and it's the bracket that we did in the show back in episode 46.9 is a 6 seed Grapes of Wrath versus 11 seed Bonnie and Clyde, and the winner, and then just below that, would be. And this also happened, I think, in your studio too, Matt. Number 3 seed Wizard of Oz versus number 14 seed North by Northwest. And in both of those situations, Bonnie and Clyde advanced. Bonnie and Clyde beat Grapes of Wrath, and North by Northwest beat the Wizard of Oz, which brings us to the vote we have right now, a second round matchup between number 11 seed Bonnie and Clyde versus number 14 seed North by Northwest. It's a lot of information, but now we've got a second round matchup. This vote has already happened in Los Angeles a couple years ago. I don't think Alex was involved. So the question.
I haven't seen Bonnie and Clyde, so I'm ineligible.
And so Alex is not going to opine. Matt, have you seen Bonnie and Clyde from 1967?
Yes, but not recently, and definitely not in your screenings.
Right, and the vote has already happened, so you can't change the vote. But I am interested to know what your preference is between the 2 films.
I can't say I don't remember Bonnie and Clyde well enough.
Fair enough. Here's what the audience had to say. The winner of the second round matchup between Bonnie and Clyde and North by Northwest in the AFI bracket, which is, again, the bracket of AFI's top 100 films, which took the top 64 and turned it into a bracket. The winner is North by Northwest, did win. This was the LA screening. And as I mentioned earlier, they were very impressed with the film. Words and phrases they used at that screening included taut, almost perfect, fun, smart, entertaining. So they really enjoyed North by Northwest. I think they appreciated Bonnie and Clyde, but it didn't have that same kind of an impact. And it sounds like that landed for you in that too.
I would have guessed that. That's not surprising.
Now it's in the third round. It's in the Sweet 16, if you will, of the AFI bracket. So it's just pretty good. So the other bracket we're talking about is I call it the THR bracket. It's the Hollywood Reporter bracket, because a couple years ago they came out with their top 100 films of all time, and I turned that into a bracket. And on that bracket, North by Northwest is actually a 16 seed. And Alex, in the first round, a 16 goes up against a 1 seed, correct. So here is what North by Northwest goes up against in the THR bracket. Citizen Kane. Orson Welles' Citizen Kane in a 1/16 matchup. Now, in the real NCAA, the 16 has only won once, and it was just a couple of years ago. In our brackets, a 16 seed has won, I think, 4 or 5 times. It is possible. So, guys, have you guys seen Citizen Kane? First question.
I just rewatched it a couple months ago with my roommates.
Matt, you've seen Citizen Kane? We saw it together in college, probably.
Yeah, I have seen it. Mostly in pieces, like different scenes and chunks. All the way through, not for a long time.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable enough opining between the 2?
Sure.
What would you pick if you were voting?
I always find it's hard, Jonathan, because it's such a yes or no answer to a nuanced decision. Which is better?
Well, it's your preference. Yeah.
My preference. If I were going to sit here right now and watch one of the 2 of them, I would watch North by Northwest.
Okay. There you go. Rewatchability is a factor here.
Yeah.
Alex.
Yeah, I agree. I think North by Northwest is a more compelling, fun film that if you're trying to convince somebody to come check out a movie, and also, you feel good after you watch it. It's a fun movie with a happy ending. Citizen Kane is a heavy thing to take in.
And so if we're up to these guys, I'm not saying they're wrong, but if we're up to these guys, a 16 seed would have beat the 1 seed. Let's see what actually happened in the vote, which happened in LA in 2016, I think it was. And the winner of this bracket is It is the 1 seed. Citizen Kane does advance in the THR bracket. To the point that Matt was making, the frustrated audience felt that they had to choose between 2 near-perfect films, is the way they put it. Films that were exactly what their visionary directors wanted them to be. But the lightness of North by Northwest actually hurt it in this case. And it's all subjective, but when deciding between the two, the audience felt the depth and innovation of Citizen Kane put it over the top. Do you guys feel like they're idiots, or you can see that point of view?
Well, I clearly think Matt and I are smarter, and we're just, both of us are all around wonderful.
Matt?
I mean, it makes sense, and I would have guessed. It makes sense that we're smarter. Yes, Alex. I was not surprised that Citizen Kane won. I wanted to vote for Citizen Kane. I think that's the right choice. But when I thought about which one would I rather watch on a random day, I would say North by or South by. North by. You know, that movie, whatever we just watched.
Well, South by Southwest did take its name from, like, it is an homage to North by Northwest.
I thought going into this that your favorite movie was North by Northwest, but I'm guessing I was wrong, and it's Vertigo.
North by Northwest is my favorite Hitchcock. So,
what's your what's your number 2 movie? I thought it was North by. No,
North by is number 19.
So what's your second favorite movie? Is it? I thought. Just tell me your first 2 favorite movies.
It's the Aristocats.
I thought it was either Vertigo or North by, but it's neither.
It's neither. Alex, do you want to tell them what my favorite 2 movies are?
I believe your favorite movie is one of the Indiana Jones films.
Raiders is number 1.
Yeah, and then your number 2, I don't remember.
Chinatown. Chinatown's my
number 2. I know Chinatown.
Oh yeah, so I always get grossed out when I hear that.
I'm sorry.
I'm glad that I'm on this classic movie podcast where I insult both Chinatown and Citizen Kane. I'm making a lot of friends.
Maddie P, this is your first show and it's over. How do you feel? Was it all that you dreamed of and more?
You could go for another hour.
Well, I mean, I don't know how our audience would feel about that, but I like that enthusiasm. I appreciate that. Alex, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I hadn't watched this movie since college, and it was really, I feel like I appreciate it in a whole new way. Watch it now as an adult. So thanks for picking that one out and facilitating the discussion. Always a pleasure.
Likewise. And now, so now it's trivia for the next classic, which is coming up in about 5 or 6 weeks. We're going to be reviewing the second film in a series that we partially discussed in episode 19.1 and extensively in our top 5 in episode 19.4. And it features a scene directly inspired by the crop duster scene in North by Northwest. And Alex, you'll be on that classic with us in a few weeks. So that is the trivia for our next classic. Next up is our sound off, our 44th sound off that Matt Polis is going to be with us. And we're going to do a tweet beat. We're going to answer all your questions related to the finale, top 10 of 2019, the Oscar preview, the 1959 in review, and the decade in review show that we did in March. That's coming up this Monday night. So guys, that's it. Anything you want to say to the audience before we go?
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.